Hey, what's going on, friends? This is another fun with Azure. This time it's part 8. We're focusing on ADF here. And see, this is what we on the left hand side is what we did on 7. Primarily what's in red here, right? So we did hook up the execution monitoring for this data factory that we're working with. And data is streaming, execution related data of this pipeline is streaming into the log analytics workspace, which is exactly what we wanted. And then we did set up the diagnostics, pretty much all the diagnostics on the data factory, right? So then today, now that we set it up and we collect through that execution, we look at this, right, and play a bit with it and see how we can use this going forward and how is it helpful, right? So that's that. And then bigger picture here real quick. So we have that SQL server that has some data. We have a data factory that pulls this data. In prior videos, we did show how to set up the runtime and everything. So this video now is more about monitoring and how we use Log Analytics Workspace, which, by the way, I need to add to this chart to basically, help monitoring folks to determine, what went wrong, where are errors, how long did it execute, and typical stuff on more like batch jobs like we have day to day. So that is that. And eventually, we're moving this data into Data Lake and Azure SQL. But I also work on, I want to mention this real quick, I also work on another video tutorial here related to Synapse, Azure Synapse. And it's likely that at some point both of those tutorials merge into one. And we do also use serverless pools, which are already kind of introduced in this other video series. And also Spark, right? And there's other compute options that we have in Synapse. But this time I definitely want to focus here on Log Analytics and Azure Monitor. Okay, so here the agenda real quick, and there's some slides and stuff. It's not going to be, slide heavy. It's really going to be hands-on because the slides you can kind of read on your own time. So I want to make sure that we do some hands-on work here. So let's go back. I have this factory here, and sometimes I say factory, but what I actually should say is, since we're doing the ADF, I should say data factory, right? Because I'm also doing that Synapse stream over there, I should say Synapse pipeline, right? So, but if you hear me kind of confusing those names, the correct way of saying it is here, this is a data factory, and the other one is Synapse Studio. So enough with that. So I have a trigger here. This is scheduled. And we already looked at this quite a bit. So I go to monitoring, and as this refreshes, you can see this already failed 3 times in a row, right? And it does execute every 5 minutes. You can see here 12:20, 12:25, 12:30 p.m., right? And we looked at this prior. I used that kind of trick again that I just renamed the underlying table. And see, this is basically looking for this. It basically says, hey, I can't find this table you tell me to pull data from. So I don't know what to do. You need to give me the right table, right? And that is that. So now let's head over to, and just for the completeness purposes, here's that database with the table in here. And obviously this is telemetry, not underscore staged. So that's why it's currently failing. We already know. So let's go back to this. This is inbuilt Azure Monitoring, right? And it is actually quite well. We could go into that error, and I showed you this last time, and that shows what the actual problem is. But Monitor does that also. And I want to show you that here. So here we went to the Log Analytics workspace that I provisioned. And under logs, you can basically generate those KQL queries. And when I provisioned this initially, I told that Log Analytics diagnostic setting job basically that's been set up behind the scenes to use the Azure Diagnostics table as a destination. Remember, there were those 2 options that I could choose from, and I decided to use the Azure Diagnostics, right? So we could definitely run this now here and see what's going on. And you see I already filter by a category, right? So obviously there's an assumption that category is part of that pipeline. So let me also show you the easiest way to run this, where you basically get everything. It's just running the table name alone, right? But then you get it unsorted and not filtered, obviously. But that allows us to see all the other options that I want to show you real quick. So, the pipeline, there's category, there's activity, trigger, pipelines. So we may want to look into different ones depending on what we're after. Now, another important thing here, keep in mind the pipeline that we're working with is a single activity pipeline, right? We don't have multiple activities, but it's totally possible that a pipeline can have multiple activities, right? So keep those relationships in mind when you look through this, because obviously that needs to be reflected and still applies. So resource type, obviously olfactory, operation name. I find this definitely interesting. And then we have here, see, we have here succeeded, in progress, succeeded, queued, yada, yada, yada. There's also a message. Some of them seem to be optionally filled, depending on what happened with it. It may get an entry, it may not. So I think what's helpful then is look at the pipeline runs and keep in mind this is automatically filtered on the last 24 hours. There's that filter here up top, right? So if I run this, it gives me an error, and I should be able to select this better. Let me go back and run. Let's try again. This time it worked. But what I also want to demonstrate to you, once you mark them nicely, like I did the second time here, you can actually run a single query in the same window from the other. That's kind of helpful too. Then you don't need to copy and paste it all the way. And that makes it definitely easier. So now we can have a look here. So you see here there's 425 and there's 430. This is basically the current time in UTC, right? So if I go to the right here and I look, pipeline, these are all pipeline runs. And what happened here with this stuff? Factory, okay. You can see here, it failed, right? So there's a failed, there's a queued, there's an in progress, and there's a failed. And this happened before as well, on the the 430. So let me go back a bit further. You can see that here it succeeded, right? So now I basically shown that since 430, 4/3/2022, 4:20 p.m., this pipeline is failing, because since then I get this, after I get queued and in progress, I get a failed, and I get a failed again, right? And that matches up what we just looked at here. That matches perfectly up with that view here, right? 3 failures of execution. So when I refresh that, you probably see more. Now we see 4. So now let's do the same over here and run that. And this is just a small fraction of the possibilities. There's a lot more data available. Typically in Azure Monitor, there's a lot more available than here in that GUI, right? You may ask why I'm doing this here. I mean, this GUI is actually also pretty good. You get, I think, most information. But if you want to go a bit more fancier and potentially integrate into like a global monitoring solution, I think, you have pipelines running in different data factories, maybe in different regions, different subscriptions, yada, yada, yada. That's then definitely a use case where Azure Monitor comes in, and you can use that to build sort of a monitoring data warehouse if you want to, right? And there could definitely be use cases where this makes a whole lot of sense based on what I see with my customers. I have a couple of other queries in here as well, and see here I can even query for the status of failed, and go figure, right? I mean, this is all about monitoring. So let me run that, and then I'm getting all the failed ones, and because I changed the names on those tables quite a bit, it's you see here error, failed, and so this is definitely good. And then the first one, let me see here, the first one actually, there's that drill down type of capability, right? It shows you all the actual values for this as a JSON, right? So that's also quite interesting. You don't need to go all the way through if you don't want to, but there is also some value in having this accessible here. And then let me see what's that. That's pretty much that's actually giving you the count of the failed ones, right? So let's run that, and the number is a bit higher here because keep in mind that's the last 24 hours. Let's do the last 30 minutes if that changes something. It should. My experience with, and that kind of lines up what I expected. Yeah, so in the last 30 minutes, I saw 4 failures, and this number should increase almost in real time as we keep running with this, right? So, I mean, this is pretty cool stuff. Shows us how we can query the log analytics custo, or the log analytics logs. You see here we're in general logs, and then you get this dialog to query that. There are other ways to get this information. Like I said, you can even set up jobs to get this data extracted and save it somewhere. Log analytics does not provide this forever. There's like a rolling window, and you can configure this. I believe it's 7 days, but don't quote me on that. I would need a check. Then the data is gone. So if you want to maintain it longer for whatever purpose, and it can definitely make sense to keep it longer, then you need to think about alternative storage locations. So that could definitely be interesting. Yeah, so this is pretty much what I wanted to show. There's definitely a lot more that can be done when we look at the Azure Diagnostics table. Let me go over that one more time. Category. So there's a lot of general information regarding the subscription and stuff, the operation name, the correlation ID, the level, okay, the status. And those fields are actually also documented. I saw documentation on this in Azure. I would recommend just if you type in Azure Diagnostics and search in your favorite search engine, you should find something on that topic. But see, there's a lot of helpful information in here. Predecessor, group ID, triggered S name, parameter. Okay, so we don't have a parameter here, but for detailed troubleshooting engineers, okay, this is basically the audience for this, right? See, there's this. It's a pretty wide table, and we really just scratched the surface with this video. So I would highly recommend spend a bit more time on KQL, write some queries, see how this all works. One other thing I also want to point out. You can actually save this. First, you can save the query, obviously, but that's not that interesting. Well, it is interesting, but what I definitely found interesting is the export capability here. And maybe we should spend some time on this in the next video. So we can export to CSV, to Excel, displayed columns, all columns. Interesting. And then export to Power BI with mQuery, right? But all of these, I mean, if you have too much data, this may be a bit of a bear to work with. But those are kind of intended for like quick external exports, and maybe you need to pass this data to someone. They manually look at this. That could be a use case for this. I would rather have it somewhere centrally stored, and that's definitely something that I see forgotten often in data warehouse projects. that, there's all that time spent for building pipelines and reports and stuff and infrastructure, which is important pieces, of course. But for the monitoring, the time is tight, right? And monitoring gives you insights into the system. So if you don't have monitoring, how do you know what's going on, right? So it is definitely an important area. It needs to be balanced to what extent it can be like neglected. Maybe that's a bit of a harsh word, but unfortunately I see this quite frequently, that monitoring doesn't get a whole lot of love, and it probably should get that type of thing, that attention, I would say. Okay, so the other thing that I found quite helpful here is that link here, custom query language. What is custom query? What is a query statement? I said in the beginning it's a bit similar to SQL. I mean, kinda. When you look at this here, so that's the table here. In that case, it's storm events. Where start time, okay, and then where. So you can have multiple wheres, and then that pipe separator here. That's also kind of unusual for SQL guys. And then at the end we have count. Right, so it's basically a count star, the way I look at this here. So it does count in the state of Florida and the time between here and there. It's case sensitive. That got me a couple of times when I fat fingered my column names and stuff. That is that. I also would like. I know that it's used in other tools, so it's not like super Azure specific. And it's definitely also used with Data Explorer, Azure Data Explorer, which is now part of Synapse Studio, right? So it's not just for monitoring. This language is going to be used in other solutions, and it's definitely interesting to have a look at for someone working as a data engineer. Okay, I think this is it. Let me see if this still is running, and maybe one more thing here real quick. This is still throwing an error, I would think. Yeah. How long does it take? 5 minutes? Yeah, I don't want to wait another 5 minutes till I can show this being green. But to make it green, I would just need to basically run this statement here. And let me give it full green screen. Then you can, if I don't have it yet on the GitHub side, you can basically grab it from here. And if I do run this, then did I run it? Oh, I think this window is frozen up. Maybe this is giving me a sign to close the video. Let's do that next time. Then I can cover that next time and go from there. Hope that was helpful, and let's keep going on the ADF next time with part 9, and see you there. Have a good one. Cheers.